I took the blame to protect them, and lost my life as I knew I'd never imagined that one single decision could erase the life. But looking back now, it didn't happen all at once. It happened quietly and visibly, the way things usually break. When you're trying too hard to hold everything together, I was the kind of woman people described as dependable, the strong one. The one who could handle pressure, the one who never complained, and that reputation didn't come from nowhere. It was built over years of being the emotional glue in my family, the problem solver, the one who stepped in whenever things went wrong. My parents used to joke that I was born responsible, and at the time, I took that as a compliment. I was the oldest daughter, and that meant something unspoken from a young age. It meant sacrifice. It meant carrying weight. It meant carrying weight that wasn't mine and pretending it didn't hurt. My younger siblings looked up to me, and I loved them fiercely more than I loved myself. If I'm being honest, my parents relied on me more than they ever admitted, and I thought that was love. I thought that being needed meant being valued. I didn't realize until much later that being needed can also mean being used. The night everything changed didn't feel dramatic at first. There was no thunder, no warning, no moment where I thought this will ruin my life. It started with a phone call late at night, my sister's voice shaking, barely able to form words. She said my name over and over again like she was trying to hold on to reality, and then she told me what happened. Something had gone wrong, something serious, something that could destroy everything she had worked for. And in that moment, I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about myself. I didn't think about what it would cost me. All I could see was her fear, her future collapsing in front of her, and without hesitation, I told her to breathe, to calm down, to let me handle it. I believed I could fix it because that's what I had always done. I drove through empty streets rehearsing what I would say, my heart racing, but my face calm. I was good at that, staying calm while everything inside me was breaking. When I arrived, I saw it clearly, the truth, the mistake, the evidence, and I knew exactly what would happen if it came out. I also knew what would happen if I stepped forward instead, and in that moment, something inside me made the choice before my mind could catch up. I said, it was me. I said I was responsible. I said I had made the call, signed the paper, moved the money, whatever version of the story they needed to hear. I became it, and the room went silent. My sister cried. My parents stared at me in shock, but no one stopped me. No one said, wait. No one said, don't do this. They let me, and I told myself that meant it was right. I told myself that this is what love looks like: sacrifice, protection, loyalty. I didn't realize I was about to lose everything that made me who I was. The investigation moved fast. Things like that always do when someone is willing to take the blame. I cooperated fully. I answered questions. I signed statements. I watched people who once respected me look at me like I was something broken, something disappointing. The whispers started almost immediately. Friends stopped calling, coworkers avoided eye contact. My name became a cautionary tale, and still I stayed silent because breaking my silence would have destroyed them. And I convinced myself that my pain was worth their safety. The day everything became official, I stood alone in a room that smelled like old paper and cold air, and listened as my future was rewritten in legal terms. I lost my job, my reputation, my independence. Everything I had built slowly, carefully over years disappeared in a matter of minutes. When I walked outside, the world looked the same, but I felt invisible, like I no longer belonged in it. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother saying, "Thank you for protecting the family," and I stared at that sentence for a long time, trying to feel comfort. Instead, all I felt was empty. The months that followed were worse than the moment itself, because at least in the moment, there was adrenaline, purpose, something to hold on to afterward. There was only silence and isolation. I couldn't find work because my name was tied to what happened. People didn't ask for my side, they assumed they knew it. I watched my sister move forward with her life, promotions, celebrations, new beginnings, and every time she smiled, a part of me felt proud, and another part felt erased. My parents avoided the subject entirely, as if pretending it never happened could make it so. Family gatherings felt different, conversations shallow, forced. I was present, but unseen. I had become the shadow version of myself, the woman who ruined everything. Even though no one said it out loud, I could feel it in the way people looked away, the way my opinions no longer mattered, the way My sacrifices were taken for granted. I told myself this was temporary, that one day the truth would come out, that one day someone would speak up, but days turned into months, months into years, and nothing changed except me. I became smaller, quieter, more cautious. I stopped trusting people, stopped expecting support, stopped believing that doing the right thing would ever be rewarded. Some nights I lay awake replaying that decision over and over, wondering what would have happened if I had chosen myself for once. But every time I reached that thought, guilt pulled me back, because if protecting none destroyed me, then maybe that was the price of being the strong one. The breaking point didn't come in a dramatic explosion, it came in a small moment, a simple conversation when a stranger looked at me and said, "You look like someone who used to be something." That sentence hit harder than any accusation ever had, because it was true. I used to be someone, and now I was just surviving in the aftermath of a choice no one else had to live with that night. I cried for the first time in years, not quiet, controlled tears, but deep, shaking sobs for the woman I used to be, the life I lost, and the truth I buried to protect people who had moved on without looking back. And in that moment, a question surfaced that scared me more than anything else. What if no one ever tells the truth? What if I disappear completely carrying a lie that cost me my life as I knew it? And that was when something inside me shifted, not anger, not revenge, but clarity for the first time. I saw the full weight of what I had done and what it had done to me, and I realized that silence was no longer noble. It was killing me slowly, and if I didn't change something, I would remain the villain in a story that wasn't mine forever. And that realization marked the beginning of something dangerous, something necessary, something they never expected. After that night, something inside me refused to go back to sleep. I tried to return to my routine, if you can even call it that, waking up late because there was nowhere to be sending resumes. I knew would be ignored, avoiding places where I might run into someone who remembered who I used to be. But the clarity didn't fade, it followed me everywhere like a quiet voice asking the same question over and over. How long are you willing to disappear for people who didn't disappear for you? I started noticing things I had ignored before, the way my sister never checked on me unless she needed reassurance that I was still keeping the story straight, the way my parents spoke about the situation as if it were a closed chapter, a mistake that had been dealt with, neatly filed away, my pain inconvenient, my presence uncomfortable. I realized that my sacrifice had become expected, normalized, almost invisible. And that hurt more than the consequences themselves, because it meant that even if the truth came out, someday it wouldn't shock them. They had already moved on without me. I began to feel anger, but not the explosive kind. It was slow, heavy, buried under years of conditioning that told me good daughters don't get angry, good women endure quietly, good sisters protect at all costs. I had been taught that my value came from what I could absorb for others, and now that lesson was suffocating me. I replayed that night again, not to torture myself, but to analyze it like evidence. I noticed things I hadn't allowed myself to see before: the hesitation in my sister's eyes when I offered to take responsibility, the silence from my parents when I stepped forward, the relief that followed immediately after I did. It dawned on me that they hadn't stopped me because they didn't want to be saved. They let me because it was convenient, and that realization broke something fundamental in me, because it forced me to confront a truth I had avoided my entire life. I was not selfless. I was conditioned, and that conditioning had made me believe my worth depended on how much I was willing to lose for others. Once that cracked, everything else followed. I stopped answering calls right away. I stopped showing up automatically. I stopped apologizing for existing, and the reaction was immediate confusion, discomfort, subtle accusations of selfishness. My mother asked why I was being distant. My sister asked if I was angry, and I wanted to scream that anger wasn't even the right word. Grief was more accurate, grief for a version of myself that never learned how to choose herself. Grief for years spent proving loyalty to people who never had to prove it back. I began writing things down, not for anyone else, but for myself. Dates, conversations, facts, details. I remembered everything. I documented the truth, not to expose it yet, but to remind myself that it existed, that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't something I imagined. It gave me a strange sense of grounding, like anchoring myself to reality in a world that had rewritten me as the villain. I didn't know what I planned to do with it at first, but Something in me needed as proof that my life before and after that decision were connected by something. Real, not just shame. The isolation deepened, but it changed texture. Before it was heavy, now it was focused. I started asking myself, what would justice even look like at this point? Restoring my name wouldn't restore my lost years, my career, my trust, but staying silent would continue erasing me. Slowly, I found myself standing at a crossroads between loyalty and survival, and for the first time in my life, I understood that choosing myself didn't mean I was cruel. It meant I was human. The moment that pushed me further came unexpectedly at a family gathering. One of those obligatory events where everyone pretends everything is fine. Someone mentioned the incident casually as a lesson, a warning story, and they spoke about me in the third person, even though I was sitting right there. They said my name with disappointment, with certainty, with finality, and something inside me snapped, not in anger but in clarity. I realized they had already decided who I was, and my silence had allowed them to be comfortable with that version. I excused myself and went outside, my hands shaking, my chest tight, and I knew then that if I didn't reclaim my voice soon, I would lose it entirely. But reclaiming my voice meant consequences, real, irreversible consequences. It meant exposing people I loved. It meant being labeled a liar after years of accepting blame. It meant reopening wounds. It meant risking being alone completely, and that terrified me because despite everything, I still loved them. That was the cruelest part, loving people who had destroyed you without ever asking if you could survive it. I spent nights weighing outcomes, imagining conversations, imagining confrontations, imagining being believed, imagining being dismissed again and again. But the fear of staying silent eventually outweighed the fear of speaking up, because silence was already costing me my identity, my mental health, my future. I started seeing a therapist quietly, someone who didn't know my family, someone who only knew me as a woman unraveling under the weight of a lie I carried for years. And when I told her everything, she didn't hesitate. She said something that shook me. She said, "You didn't just protect them, you abandoned yourself." And hearing that out loud felt like being seen for the first time in years. She helped me understand that what I had done wasn't weakness, but survival, learned behavior, and survival strategies don't always serve us forever. Sometimes they become cages. That conversation planted a dangerous seed, the idea that telling the truth wasn't betrayal, it was release. And once that idea took root, it refused to leave. I began preparing, not dramatically, not impulsively, but deliberately. I gathered documentation, I revisited timelines. I reached out to people who had questioned things back then but stayed quiet. I learned who might listen and who never would. I didn't rush because I knew that when I spoke, it had to be unshakable. The weight of years pressed on me, but so did a growing sense of resolve for the first time. I wasn't reacting, I was choosing, and that felt terrifying and empowering all at once. The night before, I decided to take the next step. I barely slept, not because I doubted myself, but because I finally understood what was at stake, not just their reputation, but my life, my future, my ability to look at myself without shame. I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, tired, guarded, scarred, but there was something new in her eyes, something steady, something unafraid of discomfort. And I whispered the truth out loud, alone for the first time, and it didn't destroy me, it grounded me. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back, because once you hear your own truth clearly, you can't unhear it. And the woman I had become was no longer willing to disappear quietly for anyone, not anymore, not ever again. The day I finally decided to stop protecting everyone at the cost of my own existence didn't begin with courage, it began with exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones, the kind that makes pretending impossible. I woke up that morning already tired of explaining myself to a world that never asked for the truth. I had spent years carrying a story that wasn't mine, shielding people who had rebuilt their lives on my silence, and the realization hit me harder than fear ever had. They were safe because I was destroyed, and that wasn't love anymore, it was erasure. I moved through that day slowly, deliberately. Every step felt heavier because I knew what was coming. Once I spoke the truth, there would be no version of my life where I could go back to being the woman who absorbed everything quietly. I gathered what I had prepared: documents, messages, timelines, details that proved what really happened, and as I looked at them spread across the table, I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not triumph, but grief for the years lost, grief for the woman who believed sacrifice guaranteed belonging, grief for the belief that being the strong one meant being disposable. I rehearsed conversations in my head, not to manipulate outcomes, but to prepare myself for rejection, because deep down, I knew telling the truth wouldn't suddenly make everyone choose me, it would simply make the lie impossible to maintain, and that distinction mattered more than I could explain. The first person I confronted wasn't the one who caused the most damage, it was the one I hoped would understand: my sister. I asked her to meet me somewhere neutral. A quiet cafe where the noise of other people could absorb what I knew would be said. She arrived smiling, casual, unaware, and that almost broke me, because it reminded me of how easy it was for her to exist without the weight I carried when I told her I was done lying. Her face changed slowly: confusion first, then panic, then anger. She tried to stop me before I could finish. She reminded me of what I had done for her. She reminded me of what she would lose. She reminded me of how much she had suffered back then, and for a brief moment the old reflex kicked in, the urge to soothe, to minimize, to carry her fear for her. But something had changed in me. I listened without interrupting, and when she finished, I said something that shocked both of us. I said, I already lost everything, and I will not lose myself too. She cried, she accused, she begged, and when none of that worked, she said something that cut deeper than anything else. She said, you promised, and that was when the truth finally crystallized. Promises made under fear are not sacred, they are cages. I stood up, walked away, and felt years of emotional debt fall off my shoulders at once. It didn't feel good, it felt terrifying, but it felt honest. The fallout was immediate: calls, messages, anger, disbelief. My parents were next, not because I owed them explanations, but because they had been complicit in my silence when I told them I was telling the truth. They reacted exactly as I feared, and exactly as I expected: denial first, then guilt, then fear. They asked me to reconsider, to think about the family, to think about consequences, and for the first time in my life, I answered without flinching. I told them I had thought about consequences every single day while I lived them alone. I told them protecting the family should never have meant sacrificing one child to save the image of the others. They didn't have a response. For that silence filled the room, and in that silence I finally understood something that changed me forever. They didn't stop me back then because they trusted my strength. They stopped me because my strength made it easier for them to avoid theirs, and that knowledge freed me in a way forgiveness never could. The process of correcting the record wasn't fast, it wasn't clean, and it wasn't kind to me at first. People questioned my timing, my motives, my credibility. They asked why now, as if survival had an expiration date, as if suffering quietly disqualified me from speaking. Later I answered when I needed to, and stayed silent when I didn't. I let facts speak where emotions would have been dismissed, and slowly the narrative began to fracture. Cracks formed in the version of events everyone had accepted, and once cracks appear, truth has a way of forcing its way through, not all at once, but enough that doubt replaced certainty, and certainty had been my enemy for years. The hardest part wasn't being doubted again. It was watching people I loved face the consequences of the truth, because no matter how justified my choice was, it still hurt to see them struggle with the fallout I had protected them from for so long. Guilt doesn't disappear just because it's no longer deserved, but every time I questioned myself, I returned to one simple truth: I had already paid for their protection with my life, and I refused to pay again. As the truth surfaced, opportunities didn't magically reappear, apologies didn't rain down, and some people never acknowledged what they had done. But something far more important happened. I began to exist again without shame. My name was no longer a secret burden. I carried it openly, reclaimed it slowly. Piece by piece, I found work again. Not immediately, not easily, but honestly. People who knew the full story trusted me in ways they never had before, because integrity born from pain is unmistakable. I stopped trying to be palatable. I stopped explaining my boundaries. I stopped absorbing blame that wasn't mine, and for the first time my life felt aligned, not perfect, but mine. Relationships shifted, some disappeared entirely, others transformed in ways I never expected a few people surprised me with accountability, gene remorse, not excuses, and I learned something. Critical forgiveness is not required for healing. Clarity is, and clarity gave me peace. The moment that truly closed the chapter came unexpectedly. I was invited to speak, not publicly, not on a stage, but privately, to a group who knew pieces of my story and wanted to understand the cost of silence. As I spoke, I realized my voice no longer shook, not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer owned me. I wasn't asking for understanding, I was offering truth, and when I finished, no one clapped, no one interrupted. There was just stillness, the kind that signals impact, and in that moment I understood my life hadn't been ruined, it had been transformed. My identity was no longer built on being the strong one, the fixer, the shield. It was built on something far more solid: self-respect. I still think about the woman I was the night I took the blame. I don't judge her. She did what she believed love required, but I wish I could tell her this love that destroys you is not loyalty. It is conditioning. And choosing yourself is not betrayal, it is survival. The world didn't end when I told the truth, it simply rearranged, and in that rearrangement I found a life that finally belonged to me. If you are listening to this carrying a burden that isn't yours, believing silence is the price of love. Believing your worth depends on how much you endure. Let me tell you what I learned too late, but live by now. Your life is not collateral damage. Your voice is not expendable, and protecting others should never cost you your existence. The moment you stop sacrificing yourself for people who would never do the same is the moment your life truly begins. And I know that now because I lost everything once and survived, and this time I chose myself, and that choice saved me.